We'll start with verse 28 and go to the end, and that should get us prepared at least and acquainted enough to be able to move into the questions, okay? So let's go ahead and start with prayer. Lord, we thank you for today, for the gift of being able to be here and to be able to hear your word, to be able to be comforted by it and encouraged as we look at the life that we have and the world that we're living in and how we have the opportunity to proclaim your truth in it. And we ask that you bless our conversation in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty. Okay, so let's take a look at this last paragraph. Do I have a volunteer that would like to read it for us?
And since they did not see it fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are all full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Though they know God's decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them.
Okay. So our first question has us zeroing in on verse 32. Though they knew God's decree that those who would practice such things deserve to die. And one of the things that we're talking about, remember this is all in the context, and a lot of our for a variety of different reasons, it highlights or moves towards individuals that are having sexual relationships with each other that are unnatural, contrary to Genesis 1 and 2. And then you get to this, people that practice these things deserve to die. Now, back in the 80s and 90s, when the AIDS epidemic really began and started moving throughout different communities, individuals read this passage as prophecy of the fact that this was prophecy of the AIDS epidemic, and that's why we have this question in here with on the back side of our page here, 15. In verse 32, Paul says that those who deserve or do these things deserve to die, and then I say, that's a little harsh, don't you think? Or is this a prophecy about the AIDS epidemic? What do you think? Yeah, there's consequences of sin, but is this a prophecy of the AIDS epidemic? Yeah, right? It's not a prophecy of the AIDS epidemic, right? And a lot of times, people will talk, and I think it's really important to know that when we go through this, realize that, yes, he talks a lot about sexual immorality in Romans 1, but what other things does he talk about? He talks about disobedient children as well, right? Not listening to their parents. And so I always think it's quite funny how we aggrandize sin, or we like to cherry pick them from time to time. One time when I was doing campus ministry, I think I probably told you guys this, but I drew a line on the board like this, and I wrote bad and not so bad sin. And I asked the college kids to tell me what were the bad ones and what were the not bad ones. What do you think they put over here for not so bad? Huh? Yeah, right? There you go. They put listening to authorities. They put going to church on Sunday morning because, it's hard to get up on Sunday morning when you're a college student, So church / Sabbath, rest, right? So they listed all these things. Oh, maybe every once in a while cheating on a paper. Yeah, white lies. let's see, yeah. So the list went um, on and on and on. And you know what do you think they put over here? No, well, I think maybe they did put murder here, okay? We'll go with that. No, they didn't, because I'll tell you what I said next, right? So I know they didn't put murder down there. They put homosexuality. They put homosexuality down there. And they put a lot of different those things that are going on in the culture. Notice that they put a lot of the 10 Commandments in the not so bad category, right? And it's this whole idea, and the whole point of it is realizing that God doesn't grade on a spectrum, and He doesn't grade on a curve either. There are no such things as not so bad and really bad sins. So it was kind of like a deceptive way of being able to teach them that we really highlight certain sins as being really bad that the church is going to be so vocal against. Yet, the church doesn't hardly spend any time on other topics, right? We like to use oftentimes we see the church doing this, speaking to a lot of the social, political issues instead of seeing that what we have is law that speaks to every aspect of our life, and it addresses every aspect of our sin, whether or not we find ourselves in certain categories or not. And remember, we're talking about sexual immorality, and in this text, Paul goes a little bit further, even describing what type of sexual immorality there is. But we know that sexual immorality goes far beyond homosexuality, right? Jesus talks about what adultery is. Even if you look at someone lustfully, in your heart you've already committed adultery with them. We want to talk about homosexuality, but where's the church talking about pornography on the internet and around the television? I can't tell you about how much I just turned it off, because it's every aspect of advertising seems to have been laced or touched by pornography in some way. Anything that uses sexual images to try to sell something is pornography. I think it was Justice Thomas that said that he doesn't know how to define pornography, but he knows it when he sees it. Maybe that was, or was that Thurgood Marshall? I don't know. One of those Supreme Court justices said that. But the problem is we see it all the time, so much so that we don't even see it anymore. And I always use the example of, remember the Hardys or Carl's Jr. commercials back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when they had Jessica Simpson sitting there in like a bikini eating a hamburger, and the hamburger just falls all over her, right? And they're using, what's the point there? The point is to use sex and sexual images and pornography in order to sell hamburgers, for crying out loud, right? So what does it have to do with hamburgers, right? And the same thing with beer and cigarettes and all sorts of different things. I think we all can remember the Joe Camel commercials and the Marlboro Man and all that other stuff. These ideas, and it's. What you have is, by the end of this, when we get to the end of chapter 1, what Paul is saying is that that all these things are taking place, and then people are encouraging it. So yes, homosexuality is included in all of that, but there is a whole gamut of activities that are taking place, primarily exchanging the truth for a lie. That's the premise behind all of this, the fact that there is natural knowledge of God, and they have decided to abandon it and walk away from it. That is, and that's what they're promoting. And what he's describing in chapter 1 is how when you exchange the truth for a lie, you see the complete undoing of God's law in your life. When it ranges from your sexual activity to listening to your parents, all of it, even inventing new ways of evil. Now, is this a new concept? No, it's not a new concept. In fact, what you have, Kay, I wish she was here, because she had a good question from the women's Bible study. I don't know if there's ladies here from the women's Bible study talking about Eve and did Adam and Eve ever repent, which and turned on me going into the weeds, in an email, you can imagine, But so what I wanted to talk about is the fact that when did she sin? Well, now everybody usually points to the fact that Eve sinned when she ate the fruit. That's not when she sinned. The first, when she doubted. Because you have in Genesis 1, God saying, you will most assuredly, certainly die. Right? In Hebrew, there's no exclamation point. So if you wanted to, make something very loud and permanent, you just repeat it. And the same thing with Greek too. This is why when the shepherds see the angels, they had a fear, a great fear, a huge fear. Right? They just keeps repeating. And so God, when he's describing the law about not eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he says, you will most surely die. Usually that's how we render it in Genesis 1. You most surely, but it's you will die. You will most certainly die. And by the time we get to Eve, Satan is talking to her about what God said. And she says, well, we shouldn't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or we may die. Or some scriptures call it, at least we may die. Or she lightens the severity of God's law. And this is what happens, and this is all Paul's talking about in Genesis, or in Romans 1. I'll get it right sometime. In Romans 1, this is what he's talking about. As soon as you remove God's absolute sovereign law and start watering it down and take away the permanence and the power of God's word in any aspect, in its force, you see the undoing of everything. It wasn't that God said you may die, or least you may die, or you might die, or even that you will die. He said you will most certainly die. And so even when you have that lightening up of it, and you see that everywhere we look nowadays, right? Just as you saw it everywhere they looked before, right? Even at the Tower of Babel, when the deceitfulness and the sin of man's heart were so great, God said, that's it. All right, and separated them. And the same thing with the flood, right? This is the idea of always trying to tear down God's law to legitimize our behavior in any way, shape, or form, or entertain our thoughts, or entertain our doubts, to be able to be comfortable in that sin. And this is why I really like using the term becoming, whenever we strip the efficacy or the power or the force of God's word, as soon as we take a little bit, you don't have to just say, oh, well, the Exodus was really only a couple families. It wasn't hundreds of thousands of people. Or you don't need to believe that Jesus was, all that critical thinking stuff, that garbage that came out of the mid-'60s. But you don't even have to do those really big things. Just as soon as you start putting a little bit of doubt, sprinkling it with our own interpretations, or saying, oh, well, that doesn't pertain to us anymore, all of a sudden you now start to see the unraveling of God's truth and sin. And when people argue and bet their life on the fact that that's not God's will anymore, like, oh, well, we live in the 21st century. We have become more advanced in our thinking and our acceptance and all this other stuff. Whenever we have that kind of a switch, all of a sudden these people become, and we do it ourselves when we try to legitimize certain actions and behaviors in our own life, we become a martyr for our sin. We're willing to die for that sin instead of confess it and place it where it actually needs to be. As soon as we start saying, oh, well, that part of my life is not really serious, right? It's not like I killed somebody, right? All of a sudden now, just because we have minimized that sin, we've now become a martyr for it. We're willing to die for it. Because that's what is going to happen. This is what Paul's talking about. Those who do these types of things deserve to die. And he's talking about righteous judgment. He's not just talking about, God coming out with a, vendetta or vengeance or something like that. He's talking about this is what the wages of your actions are. The wages of sin is death. We'll get there in chapter 3. But he's not being nasty or these or even short. He is saying this is what your actions deserve. Yeah, because what happened with Eve? As soon as she removed that concept of you most certainly, absolutely, without a doubt, die, and changed it into, oh, well, you'll die, it just lightened the load a little bit. What happened next? That sin sprung to life in her members, Luther would say, and all of a sudden you saw her living out that lack of faith and doubt. And then eating of that tree actually led her to help, to assist and participate in another person's sin. And then what happened? Oh, well, imagine that sin led to wanting to be hidden from God. Now, have any of you ever wanted to hide your sins from God? And I always ask the confirmation class when we get to God's omnipresence, and I always say, is it law or is it gospel that God's with you every single day, all the time, everywhere you go? The girls will always say it's gospel. They will always say. The boys, on the other hand, will say, no, that's law. You imagine, right? All those 12 and 13-year-old boys thinking that God's with them every minute of every day, right? Yes, right? So there you go. Okay. Any questions about that? Now, I have here referenced a passage from Luke, I believe. Is that what I have? Let's see. Yes, Luke 13. And I think it might be good to go back to it. But before I do that, did you have a question?
I have a comment and a question, but, when things start changing in our culture, like the homosexuality, I can remember years back thinking, well, this won't become the norm. Well, and that was the same years ago when people started living together and not married. This won't become the norm, although those things happen. So in our culture today, you have TV shows and movies that have the homosexual characters. Commercials have the homosexual characters eating popcorn together on the couch,
It's startling.
And it makes it so you start becoming comfortable with it.
Yeah.
So recently, my daughters and I had gone on a trip, and it was a tour, and there were two men that were the tour directors, really nice people. They introduced each other as their husbands, they were married, and nice people. They weren't pushing their homosexuality on anybody, but they weren't hiding it either. And as people, they're really nice. How do you treat these people? I mean, and yet, you don't know they're living in a sinful world.
Well, see, and that's, it's a really good question. How do you actually apply what we're learning? And the reality is you see them as you saw them as a human being, and you're able in your mind to be able to separate their humanness from their action and their sin. And being able to be very strong, and on the tour, during the tour guide, would probably not have been the appropriate time to stand up and been like, but the concept is maybe use it as a conversation piece with your family and things like that to see, okay, this is what's going on, especially when it comes across on TV. I mean, you see it all the time, especially now that the Hallmark Channel is starting to. It's weird. Anyways, so. You have this reality that when we look at people, we are not valuing them according to the flesh, right? According to those things. We don't regard them that way anymore. So we see them as God's children, and then we see their sin. And the hard part is for them is that those individuals that are living that particular lifestyle are living in a culture that not only is okay with that lifestyle, but celebrates it, right? And sensationalizes it to the point where they're attracting and luring our children. And that's the thing is, and if you actually did a little bit of research, you realize that culture, that homosexual culture, they understand that they need to recruit new members. There was articles that were published in the 90s and early 2000s from a lot of their periodicals talking about how there needs to be a huge push in American celebration of this lifestyle, or the homosexual community will be dried up. Right? And so going out and sensationalizing all this is all part of a campaign. And it's being very successful, especially reaching down into our kids. Especially when you look at, the actual statistical numbers of individuals that deal with either, that fall onto this alphabet soup spectrum that they've created, that the world's created for them, and then how many people actually flock to it and then turn away from it later on. And this has been really helpful, I think, for individuals that have family members that are living into these things, is being able to be strong, being able to be holding on not to your judgmental mindset or all any of those other things that people point to us as being, but just simply back to God's Word. All you have to do is read Romans 1. Let the Word of God, that's all Christians are, right? We don't stand on our own and say, this is wrong. We don't. All we do is point back to the Scripture and say, this is what God said. That's all Christians do. Christians talk about what God has said already. And so that's basically how I approach that, is being able to divorce the concept that the people are their actions and the reality of their story is still ongoing. So there is going to be time available for them to make these revelations. And our job as Christians isn't to condemn the person. It is to point out the fallacy and the flaws in the choices, the actions, and the lifestyles. Because that's all we can see. We can't judge the heart. And that's God's job. We don't want to be that person anyways. We don't want to place ourselves as being master over someone else's children. All we can do is say that activity is bad. And the other thing is being able to make sure that we're doing it with ourselves as well. And that's really what Christians are, and we get this bad rap in the world saying that we contradict ourselves and we're, hypocrites, because we say homosexuality is bad, but then I just read this most horrific article written by MSNBC. Now, I don't usually point out news stories or by name, but this one is so bad that they should own this one. MSNBC wrote a news story talking about the Liberty University professor and Baylor University for the sexual assaults that took place and the sexual lawlessness that took place with the president of Liberty, and then the sexual assaults that took place down in Baylor. One of the quotes from this article said, "Christian evangelicalism is practiced by making victims into more victims." They talked about how Christian evangelical Christians practice their faith by covering up sexual assault, rape, abuse, and abuse the abused. That's the spin that they were putting on Liberty University's president's indiscretions and the fact that a rape occurred on Baylor University. The fact that those were Christian institutions, for them, showed that Christianity is about sexual abuse and assault and covering it up. And the article went on and on and on and on and on and on about how that's all Christians are. That's all they do. All they do is, abuse each other sexually, and then they make and they talked about how modern day evangelicalism is about sexist oppression and oppressing women. And it was just horrendous, the things that were being said in this article. And for what end? It was simply to tear down the church. The fact that Liberty University and Baylor both came out condemning these activities that took place in their administration and on their campuses. It wasn't like Baylor University said, "All right, yep, that's what it's all about. Come and attend here. Here's how much tuition is. This is what it looks like." Did they cover it up? No, they didn't cover it up. They said this is what took place. We're appalled by it, and all these other things. But you see the world constantly attacking and trying to make the church look like it's full of hypocrites. The reality of it is we're not hypocrites. We're going to call sin a sin. When we see individuals doing something, we need to call them out on it. Like, for instance, what do you think the highest, one of the highest rating groups, percentage-wise, are living together outside of marriage? Yeah. Why? Retirement benefits. Well, okay, so now let's take that train of thought and let's pull it into the train station where your 22-year-old grandchildren are paying attention. What did you just teach them with your actions? Ends justify the means, and money is the great motivator, right? What should define your relationship and impact your lifestyle and how you relate to one another? How much money you guys make? That's what that shows. And also shows, that whole idea is I'm going to talk about how these silly kids, they live with each other, they never get married, they're out, they're living in sin, out of wedlock, and I wish they would just go see pastor and all this other stuff. And they go home and they're telling their significant other at the dining room table these things. They're practicing the same thing. And your grandkids look to you in some situations even more out of more reverence than they look at their own parents. You're the role models. And so what's good for grandma and grandpa is good for me, because they're the ones that, know how to live life. It's pretty messed up, right? And see, and that's the thing is, are we going to call, if the church is going to call out homosexuality, then why isn't the church calling out this huge amount of individual senior citizens living together out of wedlock so that they can get their full retirement benefits or not jeopardize the pension from a previous marriage? Doesn't sound very Christian-like to me, right? Doesn't sound like how God ordained marriage to be in Genesis 1 and 2, but yet we'll let that one fly under the radar because that's probably over here on not one of these bad sins. Yeah.
The truth is, many of us living together at that age, for reasons whatever, that's all we're doing is living together.
Yeah.
So if it's
But see, so let's even take that one step further. Okay, so this is all we're doing. Are you showing the world? Does the world see it that way? And that's the thing, is when we're practicing our life, and maybe we personally legitimize certain behaviors because, we're not doing X, Y, and Z, so we're not really, we're reinterpreting the commandments so that we can apply them in our life so that we can check the box. But in reality, the rest of the world sees this. And that's what are you witnessing with your actions? What are you pointing to? And that's the whole concept of what Paul's talking about here. When we're talking about all these different types of sin. I mean, look at how he describes this. What's the very first thing he describes? Manner of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. We've moved on from sexual immorality. They are gossips. Whoa, that never happens, right? Slanders, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil. That personally is my favorite one. Because the world does not stop, and our own sinful nature does not stop in trying to figure out how to break the law. Paul will later on here in the book of Romans describe how as soon as he heard the law, sin sprung up. And everybody says, well, what's that like? Well, have you ever told a child, don't touch the red button? Right? What do? Touch it, right? And as soon as you're told not to do something, what does that sinful desire want you to do? Did you want to do it before you were told not to do it? Didn't even think about it, right? But as soon as you were told not to do something, that's what Paul's talking about. And this is this whole idea of inventing evil. We invent ways to break God's law. As soon as we hear God's law, we're figuring out a way to get around it. Like not maybe living together, but but not, not doing things, I don't know, that might constitute a marital relationship, but yeah.
Well, it's just like in the beginning when he told Eve not to touch the tree, not to even touch it.
Yeah.
And so she, what did she do?
Yeah, exactly. Right? Don't do this.
Don't do it.
Don't touch the red button.
Yeah, don't touch the red button. Whatever you do, don't touch the red button. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So do you think being expelled out of the garden, this is a side note since we can do that, being expelled out of the garden was law or gospel? Was it good news that they got kicked out of the garden or bad news? You know I'm trying to trick you, huh? That's what you're waiting because it was like, no, this has got to be a trick. It was good news, right? There's two trees in the midst of the garden. What are they? One is the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life. What would have happened if Mrs. Adam or Mr. Adam and Mrs. Eve go and now that they've eaten the forbidden fruit, go and eat from the tree of life? Eternal life lived out, it's hell, right? Because it's living in a corrupted body forever. All right? And so when we look at being expelled from the garden, kicked out of it, and then that garden being gated by an angel with a flaming sword, that's for our own protection. You don't want to go back there and eat from the tree of life right now. Yes. Yep. And that's what they turn to and look to. Anyways, that was a side note. But let's at least give this question its fair chance and just show how it's not fair to say that this text is a prophecy of the AIDS epidemic. Can we have a person look up Luke chapter 13, 1-5? It's not uncommon for individuals to look at the crises or the vulnerability or the death of individuals, the destruction caused by nature, to be a condemning force of God. And so, you hear voices in the world all the time when something catastrophic happens, like the earthquakes in Haiti several years back. People were saying, oh, this is God bringing vengeance on the Haitians for making a deal with the devil when their country was established, and yada, yada, yada. And you hear, and we even ascribe it to ourselves. What did I do to deserve this? Right? But Jesus, he confronts that way of thinking in Luke 13. So is there a person that would read that for us?
There were some present at that very time who told him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. And he answered them, do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered in this way? No, I tell you, but unless you repent, you will all likewise perish. For those 18 on whom the tower in Siloam fell and killed them, do you think that they were worse offenders than all the others who lived in Jerusalem? No, I tell you, but unless you repent, you will likewise perish.
Yeah. So, can you say the reason why this happened to somebody is because they sinned really bad? No. Now, there are situations where you have sins that bring about immediate consequences, and you can see that, right? And so that's a totally different scenario where, we call that in our house the school of life, right? When you make a mistake or you do something and the consequence is right there, like going out to the bus stop without your coat on. You didn't honor your father and mother and put your coat on, and now you're standing out in 27-degree weather and you don't have a coat on. That's a pretty good choice, wasn't it? Right? And so there's certain things that have immediate consequences, but then there's certain things that don't. And so you have these obscure stories that Jesus is talking about, the Tower of Siloam falling on 18 individuals. And he asks the question, were they the reason why that happened that day? Was that because they were sinning? No. Right? They were no greater sinner than any of you, than anybody else in Jerusalem. And this is, kind of echoing in your mind probably is the story of the woman caught in adultery, where all the leaders are there with rocks ready to stone her, and Jesus draws a line in the sand and says that, the whole concept of he who is without sin can throw the first rock, and they all drop their rocks and leave. Right? Have you noticed about that story is where's the man? The man that she committed adultery with? At that time, what were the leaders of the church all ready to do? They were going to kill this woman. She was caught in adultery. What do you think happened? How did she get caught in adultery? Probably, yeah. No, they probably caught her with a man. But where is the man that they caught her with? Right? And so there's a whole lot of this idea of, making sure that we're paying attention to this as the church, is that we're not just picking and choosing sin, but we're actually paying attention to everything that's going on, and we realize that we are just as great as sinners as everybody else, and we continue to indulge in certain sins that are condemnable by death. And every time we try to legitimize our sin by either making it normal or common or any of those things, we are becoming a martyr for that sin, and we are choosing to die for those sins and rather than live the life that Christ has given us. This is why when Jesus is talking about if the Son has set you free, you were free indeed, he is talking about how he is the way, the truth, and the life. All those things come to the reality that there are only two forces in this life, death and life. Jesus came to bring life, but every time we give ourselves back over to our sin and try to legitimize it and justify it, we are becoming martyrs for those things. And we're saying that those things are more important than living as Christ's child. So, any thoughts or questions about that? All right, let's go on to question 16. So it says, Paul finishes by rebuking those who give approval for unrighteous behavior. What's so wrong about giving approval to these things? And how many ways can we give approval for the things that we see in this life? What are the warnings? All right, so if we could have just somebody look up the Ezekiel passage, another Galatians, and then that 1 Timothy, and I'll talk for just a little bit, and then we'll have those readings. So, this idea of explaining away, we'll explain away particular sins. We'll talk about how, that's what's going on in today's culture. We legitimize it. I like what you were talking about how we embrace it to the point where it becomes normal. It becomes imputed into all the aspects of our life. It just becomes a way, just the way things are. My question is that ever? I agree with you about. Is this ever going to happen to the point where people do not react when they see two men kissing on the television? Because what we have here is Romans 1. We know what's natural. And we know what God's law is. Now, are we going to get to the point where the world starts legitimizing sin to the point where we just don't see it anymore? And the thing, and that's why we need to be coming here and continuing to build each other up and sharpen each other's swords so that we can recognize something for what it is. And not just cherry pick these things, but all of it. Right? All of it. Yes, Janie?
Right back in the, whatever it was, 1940s and 50s, where homosexuality was against the law, and they were so hounded and destroyed.
Yes, okay, so, and that's where you go back to the, people legitimizing hatred and anger, violence, and discrimination by using their religion. Right? And so you're using this example of how we weaponize our faith against the person, and even to the point of exercising violence, either violence physically or violence emotionally and verbally on an individual, when in reality we go back to the original comment, I forget where it was, that someone was saying, how do you move to somebody who is dabbling in these lifestyles and sins? Will you realize that they are a child of God first? And that's what we need to impress upon them. And that they are not defined by their actions, but they are accountable for their actions. And all that takes genuine love and mercy and authenticity, and it makes it so you want to win over the sinner, not punish them or ostracize them or hold them up as an example of what not to do. And that's what you had a lot of going on, and why some of these individuals that struggled with this lifestyle went into hiding, right? And kept it very secret. And that's not what we want. Doesn't matter what sin it is. We don't want people to harbor these things in the quietness of their home. We want to be able to help everybody, and we want to be leaning on people to lovingly help us heal, and not feel like we have to hide from one another. Because what is that? That's Genesis 3, hiding from one another, because that's what was taking place between Adam and Eve. Yes, they were hiding from God, but why did they have to sew fig leaves on? To hide from each other. And the things that God made as perfect and the means for procreation, the continuation of the species, now all of a sudden, because of sin, had become shameful. They hid because they were ashamed. I was talking about this on Monday night. Think about sexual organs, for instance. This is one of the pinnacles of creation. Sixth day, God saved the best for last. And what he did, even after he made man, he had to make a woman because he saved best for last, right? Yeah, okay. So, but then, right, they were to use these sexual organs for the continuation of the species, the procreation for future generations. What has the world turned our genitals into? I was telling the Monday class that one of the things I do for marriage counseling or marriage retreats, when I talk about intimacy, I ask people to go up to the board and write all the names and words the world uses to describe our sexual organs. How full do you think the whiteboard is? How appropriate do you think the whiteboard is? You make sure you got to erase the whiteboard before confirmation, right? Because what is the world? What kind of words does the world use to describe our sexual organs? Disgusting words. At the very best, I like the word that Keith used on Monday. He said, because I said at the very best, it just uses the biological terms. That's the best. But Keith said, no, those are benign words. They don't mean good or bad, right? They're just, they're just the biological organs. That's the best the world can do. So then we erase it, and I say, okay, so go write on the whiteboard all the things that the church uses to describe your sexual organs, to combat the world's attack on it. Or how about sex in general? To combat all the ways the world uses the words the world uses to describe sex. And the church is silent on it. This is what God made, the best. Your sexual organs. This is the first thing Adam and Eve hid from each other. That's what they were ashamed of. How can we take what was most highly regarded by God and turn it into something shameful, and then spend an entire existence in our culture using all of its available resources to belittle and scandalize those parts of our body to the point where they make up words to describe them in the most grotesque ways? Where's the church on that? Anyways, I don't know how I got on that, but all right, how about Ezekiel 33? Well, actually, yeah, let's do this real quick so we can say we finished 2 questions. So Ezekiel 33, 1-9.
The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, speak to your people and say to them, if I bring the sword upon the land, and the people of the land take a man from among them, and make him their watchman, And if he sees the sword coming upon the land, and he blows the trumpet and warns the people, then if anyone who hears the sound of the trumpet does not take warning, and the sword comes and takes him away, his blood shall be upon his own head. He heard the sound of the trumpet and did not take warning. His blood shall be upon himself. But if he had taken warning, he would have saved his life. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and does not blow the trumpet, so that the people were not warned, and the sword comes and takes any of them, that person is taken away in his iniquity. But his blood I will require at the watchman's hand. So if you, son of man, I have made a watchman, so you, son of man, I have made a watchman for the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, you shall give them warning from me. If I say to the wicked, O wicked one, you shall surely die, and you do not speak to warn the wicked to turn from his way, that wicked person shall die in his iniquity. But his blood I will require at your hand. But if you warn the wicked to turn away from his way, and he does not turn from his way, that person shall die in his iniquity, but you will have delivered your soul.
Yeah. So we're out of time, but just to wrap up this conversation, is that it is so important to be able to call a thing what it is. A sin is a sin, and it's not in the eye of the beholder. God said this. Again, what is the watchman's job? The watchman's job is to warn according to what God has said, warn according to the truth. And then God even goes so far as saying, if you do not, you participate in their sin, and their guilt remains on you. So this is a calling to us as Christians to be able to make sure that we're calling a thing what it is, and not just letting the world whitewash all these things that are contrary to God's will. That we actually have an obligation as Christians to say, no, that's bad. You're not bad because you're a child of God, but what you're choosing to do is bad. It's almost like talking to a child, right? You're not a bad boy, but you're making some very bad decisions or poor decisions. We're seeing,
your sandals and look them more foolish.
and these conversations that we're talking about today are pretty heavy because we're in Romans 1. Romans 2 is going to be heavy too, but we're going to get to the gospel. We're going to get to the gospel because, like you said, I mean, you're thinking about, is it ever possible for me to always call something out or to always recognize something for what it is? No, it's not. Right? And Paul is going to talk about how, look at all these things you're doing, all these things that have brought you death and destruction, but there's only one thing that brings you life. It's not your actions, but Christ who called you. So we'll get to the gospel eventually, but not today. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for today and for this opportunity to reflect on your will for our life, how we live it, and how we call others to live in relationship with you, knowing that we are so imperfect. And yet, you and your grace have called us to be your own children. Give us the words and the opportunity to share that same truth with those who also in this world struggle with their imperfections, struggle with their own sin, but need your gospel. Lord, we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.